Hi guys, and welcome to Boring History Story Relaxing. Tonight we step quietly into the endless American prairie in the winter of 1843, where the horizon has disappeared beneath a wall of blowing snow. And the only thing separating you from the freezing wind is a covered wagon that suddenly feels much smaller than it did this morning. It is the sort of night that looks beautiful from the safety of a warm home. But you are standing directly inside it, blinking as icy flakes sting your face and settle into your eyelashes. You probably will not survive this if you expect modern comforts to appear from nowhere. They absolutely will not. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you are here, let everyone know where you're listening from, along with your local time, now. Dim the lights and breathe slowly as the prairie stretches around you like a silent white ocean. The wind arrives first. It never politely introduces itself. It simply pushes against your shoulders with surprising force, slipping beneath your coat, crawling down your sleeves, and reminding you that nature has never signed any agreement promising to be fair. You pull your hat lower, it barely helps. Snow races sideways instead of falling. Tiny crystals scratch against your cheeks like handfuls of fine sand. You instinctively turn your face away, only to discover that the wind has somehow circled around and found your other cheek instead. The prairie has very few places to hide. That is one of its defining features. Beautiful in summer, perhaps. Less charming when winter decides to demonstrate who is truly in charge. Your wagon creaks nearby. The white canvas covering flaps sharply, sounding almost alive. Wooden wheels groan as another gust rocks the entire vehicle. Inside sits nearly everything you own. Clothing, flour, cooking pots, bedding, spare tools, a family Bible carefully wrapped in cloth. Small treasures that seemed perfectly organized yesterday now resemble a puzzle someone has enthusiastically shaken. You're not traveling alone. Several wagons form part of the same company, each carrying families who have slowly become familiar faces over the long journey west. No one has known each other forever, yet hardship has a curious way of introducing strangers much faster than polite conversation ever could. Someone calls through the wind. The words disappear almost immediately. Another voice answers, equally lost in the storm. You nod anyway, pretending you understood something useful. One well-established historical fact often surprises modern people. Many emigrants heading west in the early 1840s relied on oxen rather than horses, because oxen were stronger over long distances, cheaper to replace, and better suited for hauling heavy wagons across difficult country. They were slower, certainly, but endurance mattered far more than speed when crossing thousands of miles. The oxen stand with lowered heads, snow collecting across their broad backs until they almost resemble wandering boulders. You cannot help feeling sorry for them. Then you remember that your own nose has gone numb. Sympathy briefly becomes a shared experience. The smell of the prairie has changed completely. During warmer months you might notice dry grass, damp earth, wildflowers, or fresh rain. Tonight the air carries almost no scent at all except cold itself, mixed with the faint smell of leather harnesses, damp wool, animal breath, and wood that has absorbed weeks of travel. It is strangely clean, almost too clean. Every breath feels sharp enough to polish the inside of your lungs. Your boots crunch into snow that has drifted around the wagon wheels. Each step requires effort because fresh snow hides uneven ground beneath it. You discover one frozen rut the unpleasant way, stumbling forward and catching yourself on the wagon frame. Grace has officially abandoned the evening. No one laughs. Everyone is too busy staying upright. The covered wagon itself is both reassuring and disappointing. From a distance, it appears cozy enough. Popular imagination often treats these wagons as comfortable little homes rolling happily toward adventure. Reality is much less generous. They were freight vehicles first. Sleeping inside them happened because necessity demanded it, not because anyone had carefully designed an enjoyable bedroom experience. The canvas covering offers protection from snow, but very little insulation against the bitter air. You place one hand against it. The fabric feels stiff with cold. Another blast of wind pushes it inward before letting it snap back again. Some travellers privately nicknamed their wagons Prairie schooners because the white canvas reminded them of the sails of ships crossing the sea, standing here tonight, with snow swirling instead of waves. The comparison suddenly makes perfect sense. You're sailing across an ocean after all. It simply happens to be made of grass hidden beneath winter. A curious story occasionally appears in old frontier traditions. Some travellers believed hanging a horseshoe inside the wagon with its open end facing upward would collect good fortune throughout the journey. Others insisted turning it upside down allowed luck to pour over the family instead. Which version brought better results depended entirely upon whom you asked around the campfire. Practical evidence remained rather limited. Historians still argue whether severe winter crossings in years like this were mostly the result of poor planning, or whether rapidly changing weather simply trapped otherwise careful emigrant parties at the worst possible moment. The truth probably sits somewhere between those possibilities, hidden beneath layers of personal diaries, faded memories, and unpredictable weather patterns that no one could fully control. The daylight is fading. Clouds swallow what little sunlight remains until afternoon begins looking suspiciously like evening. You glance toward the western horizon. There is no horizon anymore. Only white, only movement, only endless wind carrying fresh snow across land that refuses to reveal where it ends. Your fingers ache despite thick gloves. First they hurt, then they tingle, then, strangely enough, they begin feeling almost comfortable. That last part is not comforting at all. You rub your hands together quickly, blowing warm breath across stiff knuckles. Tiny clouds escape your mouth before disappearing into the storm. Even your own breathing feels temporary, nearby. One child asks when everyone will stop for the night. A mother answers softly that it will be soon. You suspect she hopes that is true as much as the child does. There is something quietly remarkable about ordinary conversations continuing inside extraordinary circumstances. People still ask about missing spoons. Someone worries over flour getting wet. Another person cannot remember where they packed an extra mitten. Life stubbornly refuses to become dramatic every second of every day. Even during a blizzard, someone is probably wondering where they put the cooking pot. That oddly feels reassuring. The familiar survives beside the frightening. Your stomach reminds you that lunch happened many hours ago. Hunger mixes with exhaustion until both become difficult to separate. You know sleep will eventually come, yet already suspect it will not resemble the peaceful rest promised by soft mattresses and warm bedrooms. Tonight every decision will revolve around staying warm enough to greet the morning. The wind rises once more. The wagons slow. People begin searching the snowy landscape for any place that might offer the slightest advantage against the coming night. You tighten your coat, adjust your grip on the wagon, and take another careful step forward. Following the others into the swirling white, hoping that somewhere just ahead lies a place where this restless prairie will allow you a few precious hours of uneasy sleep. The search for a place to stop begins almost without anyone announcing it. There is no grand command carried across the prairie. There's only a shared understanding that daylight is slipping away and that continuing blindly into the storm would invite even greater trouble. The wagons creep forward at little more than walking pace. Every person scans the snowy landscape, hoping to spot something, anything. That might give a small advantage against the relentless weather. You quickly learn that on the open prairie, shelter is a very generous word. A slight rise in the ground counts as shelter. A cluster of shrubs no taller than your shoulders counts as shelter. Even a shallow depression where the wind seems just a little less eager to slap your face suddenly feels like a luxury resort by frontier standards. The snow continues blowing sideways. It slips into every gap between your clothing. Tiny icy grains collect around your collar and melt against your neck before becoming cold again. You had forgotten that water can somehow feel even colder after it has already been freezing. Nature enjoys little jokes like that. Your boots sink deeper now. Beneath the fresh powder lies older snow packed into uneven ridges. Every few steps your foot twists slightly, your ankles protest. The muscles in your legs burn with quiet determination. Walking has become less about moving forward and more about negotiating with the ground. The wagon wheels leave faint tracks for only a few moments before the wind wipes them away. It is strangely unsettling. The prairie seems determined to erase every sign that people have ever crossed it. You glance behind. Nothing remains except white. One of the older men walks ahead with careful, measured steps, using a long stick to test the snow in front of him. Hidden hollows can swallow a wheel or break an axle if luck turns sour. Every step is a question. Every patch of snow hides its own answer. A mainstream historical fact worth remembering is that a broken wagon axle was among the greatest fears of westward emigrants. Spare parts were often carried. But replacing heavy wooden components during severe weather demanded strength, time, and precious daylight. Sometimes travellers were forced to abandon damaged wagons altogether if repairs became impossible. You silently thank every sturdy wheel beneath your own wagon, for now. The wind whistles through the iron fittings. Leather harnesses creak as the oxen continue pulling with patient determination. Their broad hooves press steadily into the snow. Steam rises from their noses in slow clouds. Frost clings to the coarse hair around their mouths, giving each animal a frosted beard that would almost seem amusing if the circumstances were not so serious. One ox pauses. It simply stands still, not because it is stubborn, but because even animals sometimes question the wisdom of walking into a blizzard. The driver gently encourages it forward with calm words instead of anger. Shouting would only waste energy. Besides, the ox has probably earned the right to hesitate. You notice something else. The silence between gusts. It lasts only a heartbeat before another roar arrives. Yet during those tiny pauses the prairie becomes almost impossibly still. No birds sing, no insects buzz, no distant rivers murmur. It is as though winter has politely asked every living thing to keep its voice down. Then the wind returns. It always returns. You pull your scarf higher. Only your eyes remain exposed. Even your eyelashes now carry tiny beads of ice. Someone points toward a low stretch of land ahead. It is hardly dramatic. There are no towering cliffs or dense forests waiting to welcome weary travellers. Instead, the ground dips gently before rising again on the far side. The depression is shallow, perhaps only a few feet lower than the surrounding prairie. Tonight, that feels like finding treasure. The wagon slowly angled toward it. The difference becomes noticeable almost immediately. Not warm, certainly not comfortable, simply less terrible. The wind no longer strikes with quite the same force. It still reaches you. But the shallow hollow interrupts its full strength. You suddenly understand why experienced travellers spent so much time studying the land instead of charging ahead without thought. The prairie rewards patience. Sometimes. You kneel to scoop a handful of snow. It is dry and powdery, refusing to pack together easily. Good for drifting. Poor for building protective walls. You let it slip through your fingers like white sand. Your gloves are damp now. That realization brings no joy. Damp clothing is an unwelcome companion during winter travel. Once moisture settles into wool or leather, keeping warm becomes much harder. You flex your fingers repeatedly, encouraging blood to continue its journey toward your fingertips. Nearby, two women inspect the surrounding brush. There is not much. Thin, leafless stems poke through the snow. Few twisted shrubs cling stubbornly to life. Firewood is scarce. You begin noticing every fallen branch as though it were made of silver. A quirky frontier belief occasionally surfaced among emigrant groups that certain patches of prairie grass left standing through winter indicated kind ground. Places supposedly favoured by good fortune for camping. There was no scientific basis for the idea, of course, but after weeks or months of uncertainty, many travellers found comfort in reading hopeful signs from the landscape around them. Hope has always been surprisingly lightweight. People carry it even when everything else feels impossibly heavy. You inhale deeply, the air stings, your nose catches faint scents drifting through the hollow, cold leather, oxen, wet canvas, smoke, not much smoke, just enough to tell you that someone has finally coaxed a few sparks into becoming a tiny fire somewhere among the wagons. That smell instantly lifts everyone's spirits. Remarkable, really. A thin ribbon of smoke can smell almost magical when warmth has become the rarest luxury imaginable. Children gather close to adults without being asked. No one wanders far. The storm has shrunk the world. Yesterday the prairie stretched endlessly in every direction. Tonight your entire universe extends only as far as you can clearly see through blowing snow. Perhaps 30 yards, perhaps less. Beyond that waits only whiteness. Historians still debate whether emigrant companies that stayed tightly grouped during severe storms consistently fared better than parties that spread out while searching for campsites. Personal journals suggest both methods had successes and failures, reminding us that survival often depended upon countless small circumstances beyond anyone's control. Your shoulders ache from helping steady the wagon over rough ground. You barely notice the strain while moving. Now that the pace slows, every muscle begins introducing itself, your back, your knees, your neck. Even your jaw seems tired from clenching against the cold. The oxen finally stop, not dramatically, simply one careful step at a time until they stand quietly, their sides rising and falling with steady breaths. For a moment nobody speaks. Everyone simply listens. The wind still blows overhead, but inside the shallow depression its voice has softened enough that you can hear the gentle snorting of the animals, the rustle of canvas, the creak of settling wood, and the muffled crunch of boots moving through fresh snow. It almost sounds peaceful. Almost. You know this is only the beginning of the evening. The wagons still need arranging. Animals must be secured, supplies have to be protected. Somewhere inside that crowded wagon waits a place where you will attempt to sleep. Though calling it a bed would require an imagination as vast as the prairie itself. You brush snow from your sleeves, pull one last deep breath of icy air into your lungs, and step toward the waiting wagons as everyone begins transforming this lonely patch of frozen earth into a temporary home for the longest night of the journey. The moment the wagons stop moving, the quiet urgency begins. No one wastes precious minutes standing around to admire the scenery. There is very little scenery left to admire anyway. The prairie has hidden itself beneath drifting snow, and the blizzard still prowls across the open land with stubborn determination. You tighten your gloves and immediately join the work. Every task matters. Every pair of hands matters. The wagons cannot simply remain scattered wherever they happen to stop. They need to become something more than vehicles. For tonight, they must become walls. The drivers speak calmly to the oxen, guiding them into position one careful step at a time. The great animals seem almost relieved to move slowly after the long struggle through the storm. Their hooves sink deeply into the snow with dull, heavy thumps. The wagons gradually form a rough circle, not a perfect one. Nothing on the frontier is ever perfectly measured. One wagon sits slightly crooked. Another leaves a wider gap than anyone would prefer. Still, together they create a barrier that can soften at least part of the relentless wind. You step back for a moment and study the arrangement. It is surprisingly comforting. A few hours ago, each wagon felt alone beneath the enormous sky. Now they stand shoulder to shoulder like old friends, refusing to abandon one another. The wind rushes against the outside of the circle, but inside, the air feels just a little calmer. The difference is not dramatic enough to make anyone smile with delight, yet it is enough to make everyone breathe a little easier. Sometimes survival comes in very small improvements. One well-established historical fact is that wagon companies often circle their wagons when stopping for the night, although not always because of attacks as popular stories suggest. More often, the arrangement helped organize camp, protect livestock, reduce wind exposure, and keep people together in unfamiliar country. Hollywood, as you might guess, has occasionally preferred a more exciting explanation. Reality was usually far more practical. Someone begins unhitching the oxen. The thick leather straps creak as frozen buckles resist stiff fingers. You reach out to help loosen one of the harnesses. The leather feels almost as hard as wood after hours in the bitter cold. Your fingertips complain immediately. You ignore them. The ox gives a slow shake of its enormous head. Snow scatters from its ears and back. A cloud of warm breath rolls into the icy air before disappearing almost instantly. You gently rub the animal's neck. Its winter coat is coarse beneath your glove. The warmth coming from its body is astonishing. For one brief moment you almost envy the ox. Then you remember it has spent the entire day pulling several thousand pounds through deep snow. Perhaps envy is unnecessary. The animals are led toward the center of the circle where they will be easier to watch. A few receive extra feed saved carefully for difficult days like this. The sound of chewing fills the air. It is oddly soothing. Life continuing exactly as it should. Nearby, someone begins stacking wooden buckets upside down so they will not fill with blowing snow. Another traveller gathers loose ropes before the wind can carry them away. A teenage boy chases a hat that has suddenly decided to begin its own westward journey. The hat wins for several seconds. Eventually the boy catches it against a wagon wheel. Victory comes with frozen ears. You cannot help smiling, even in miserable weather. Small moments of quiet comedy refuse to disappear. The smell of animals grows stronger inside the wagon circle. Oxen, horses, damp leather, wool blankets, and faint wood smoke mingle into a scent that will probably cling to your clothing for days. It is not unpleasant. It simply smells like survival. You notice the snow collecting against the outside wheels. Drifts are already beginning to form where the wind slows after striking the wagons. Nature is slowly building additional walls without asking permission. Perhaps that is one favour the storm is willing to grant. A curious frontier tale occasionally appeared in emigrant journals describing mysterious lights dancing across snowy plains during fierce winter nights. Some believed these pale glows were wandering spirits guiding lost travellers. Others blamed unusual reflections from ice crystals carried through the air. Modern explanations usually point toward atmospheric effects, but the stories themselves remain wonderfully eerie. You glance into the blowing snow, nothing glows tonight, just white, just wind. And honestly, that is mysterious enough. The drivers carefully inspect every wagon. A loose chain is tightened, a wheel wedge is checked, a rope is pulled snug. One cracked board receives an extra strip of leather for support. Small repairs completed now might prevent much larger problems before morning. You run your hand along the side of your own wagon. The wood feels rough beneath your glove. Tiny patches of frost sparkle wherever moisture has frozen across the grain. The canvas above snaps softly with each passing gust, sounding almost like a sail aboard a distant ship. The nickname Prairie schooner returns to your thoughts. Out here it feels entirely appropriate. Except oceans rarely try to freeze your eyebrows. Your stomach rumbles again. The scent of smoke has grown slightly stronger. Someone has managed to coax a modest fire into existence using carefully protected dry kindling carried inside the wagons. It is not large enough for celebration, but its orange glow seems almost miraculous against the endless white landscape. People naturally drift toward it, not too close. There is barely enough fuel to cook supper. Every stick must be used wisely. Children gather beside their parents. They stamp their boots to restore feeling to cold feet. One little girl reaches toward the flames before her mother gently reminds her to stay back. She nods with exaggerated seriousness. About 10 seconds later, she inches forward again. Some things never change across generations. Historians continue discussing whether experienced wagon captains deliberately selected campsites based primarily on prevailing winter winds, or whether immediate practical concerns such as water, grazing, and terrain almost always outweighed weather considerations. The surviving diaries suggest different leaders made different choices depending upon the conditions they faced. Experience certainly helps. Luck helps too. You become aware of the fading light. The world is slowly turning blue. Snow reflects what little daylight remains until the prairie glows with a strange, gentle brightness. Shadows soften. The outlines of the wagons blur beneath drifting flakes. It is beautiful. That may seem like an odd thing to admit, yet difficult places often carry unexpected beauty. Perhaps beauty simply becomes easier to notice when comfort has disappeared. The cold grows sharper. You can feel it reaching deeper through your boots despite all your movement. Your shoulders stiffen. Your cheeks burn. Every breath leaves a cloud that hangs briefly before joining the frozen air. A nearby woman quietly counts blankets while another checks sacks of flour to make certain none have become soaked. Someone searches for a missing spoon. There it is, tucked beside a cooking pot exactly where no one thought to look. You smile to yourself. Yesterday it was probably an ordinary spoon. Tonight it feels oddly valuable. The wagon circle is complete now. The animals are secure. The first hints of supper begin taking shape beside the struggling fire. Soon the real challenge will begin. Transforming a freight wagon packed with supplies into a place where human beings can somehow rest through one of the coldest nights of the journey. You brush another layer of snow from your coat. Watch the last pale light fade beyond the drifting prairie, and climb toward the waiting wagon, knowing that every inch of space inside will soon matter more than ever before. The work outside is finally finished. At least for now. The wind has not surrendered. It continues to sweep over the prairie with patient determination. But the wagons stand together. The animals are settled as well as they can be, and every traveller understands that the next task cannot be delayed any longer. You have to turn a freight wagon into a place where people can sleep. You stand beside the rear of the wagon and look inside. In daylight, it always seems to have enough room. Now it appears impossibly small. The supplies that have carried you across hundreds of miles are still here. Flour sacks, cooking pots, spare clothing, toolboxes, coils of rope, buckets, barrels, folded quilts, and bundles wrapped carefully in canvas all compete for the same precious space. It feels less like entering a bedroom and more like climbing into an overstuffed cupboard. The first job is simple in theory. Move everything that can safely be moved. In practice, nothing feels simple. Every object has become heavier during the day, partly because of the cold and partly because your muscles are quietly protesting every movement. You lift a wooden crate and slide it toward the front of the wagon. Someone beside you shifts a barrel into a tighter corner. A rolled buffalo robe is tucked against the wagon wall to make room for bedding. Every inch matters. A few extra inches can mean the difference between sleeping on your side or spending the entire night folded into a shape that would confuse a modern yoga instructor. You smile at the thought, barely. The cold discourages unnecessary laughter. Your breath hangs inside the wagon in pale clouds. They drift upward until touching the chilled canvas roof, where tiny droplets immediately begin freezing. You reach up and touch the inside of the cover. The fabric feels stiff, not brittle enough to crack, thankfully, but certainly nothing like the soft canvas you handled during warmer weather. Surviving journals from emigrants repeatedly describe how covered wagons were designed to protect cargo rather than provide comfortable living quarters. Families adapted them as sleeping spaces only when circumstances demanded it. Many people actually preferred sleeping beneath the open sky during pleasant weather because there was more room and better air. Tonight, of course, sleeping outside would be an entirely different sort of adventure, one that nobody wishes to experience. You kneel and begin brushing away bits of loose snow that blew inside whenever the rear flap opened. The snow has already started melting into tiny damp patches on the wooden floor. That will never do. Anything damp becomes the enemy after sunset. A folded cloth quickly wipes away what moisture you can find. The boards underneath feel rough beneath your fingers. They have carried thousands of pounds across rivers, hills, muddy trails, and frozen ground. Their surface bears scratches from tools, barrels, and countless boots. These are hard-working boards. They have earned every mark. Someone hands you a bundle of clothing, not because anyone plans to wear every piece tonight. Instead, coats that are not immediately needed become makeshift cushions against the hard wagon sides. Spare shirts are tucked into awkward corners. Wool stockings fill narrow gaps where cold air likes to creep inside. Nothing goes to waste. Even a rolled scarf becomes useful. You suddenly understand that frontier comfort is less about owning luxurious things and more about convincing ordinary things to perform entirely new jobs. Outside, another gust shakes the wagon. The canvas ripples overhead with a loud flutter. The wooden frame answers with a familiar creak. For a brief moment you imagine the wagon speaking, not complaining, simply clearing its throat after another long day. An old frontier story claimed that wagons developed personalities during long journeys. Some families affectionately named theirs, speaking to the vehicle almost as though it were another travelling companion. Whether this reflected loneliness, affection, or simple humour is difficult to say, but more than one diary contains references to particularly faithful wagons that had carried families safely across impossible country. You glance around your own temporary shelter. Perhaps there is something to that, after all. This wagon has become far more than transportation. It is your pantry, your wardrobe, your storage room. Soon it will become your bedroom, and tomorrow morning it will once again become your wagon. The transformation happens every single day. You carefully inspect the canvas ties along the side. One has loosened. Your fingers are stiff, making the knot strangely difficult to tighten. The leather strap resists your efforts before finally slipping into place. You give it another firm pull. Better, much better. Cold drafts are impossible to eliminate completely, but every small improvement counts. Several letters written during westward migrations describe families stuffing spare cloth into tiny openings where the canvas met the wagon frame. It was a simple solution, but surprisingly effective at reducing the worst of the wind. You follow the same idea. A folded piece of wool disappears into one narrow gap. Another is tucked near the rear flap. The breeze immediately feels less determined. Not gone, simply less enthusiastic. You will gladly accept that. The smell inside the wagon slowly changes as more bedding arrives. Fresh wool, leather, faint cedar from a wooden chest, a lingering trace of flour dust, hints of smoked bacon wrapped carefully inside cloth. All of it mixes into a scent that somehow feels reassuring. It smells lived in. It smells familiar. It smells like home has been packed into a moving box. Outside, voices drift softly through the evening. Nobody speaks loudly anymore. The storm has encouraged quieter conversations. You hear someone reminding a child to remove damp mittens before climbing inside. Another traveller asks whether the cooking pot has been cleaned. Someone laughs gently after discovering a spoon tucked into the pocket of an apron. Apparently the missing spoon from earlier has found a companion. Life insists on remaining ordinary, even here. Researchers continue examining how emigrant families organize the cramped interiors of covered wagons, because first-hand descriptions vary considerably. Some accounts describe remarkably tidy arrangements, while others suggest that long days on the trail often reduced even the neatest plans into cheerful disorder. The truth likely depended on the family, the weather, and how exhausting the previous day's travel had been. You suspect tonight would challenge even the most organized household. The wooden boughs supporting the canvas arch overhead like the ribs of some enormous animal. You run your hand along one smooth curve. The wood is cold but solid, reliable. That word matters. Reliable. In a world where weather changes without warning, and every mile brings uncertainty, reliable objects become deeply comforting. You settle one final crate into position. There. The floor is finally clear enough, not spacious, certainly not, but clear enough for quilts and blankets to follow. You ease yourself backward and sit for a moment, listening. The fire outside crackles faintly. Oxen snort somewhere beyond the wagon circle. Wind hums through the canvas with a lower, steadier voice than before. Snow taps gently against the roof. The sounds blend together into an oddly peaceful rhythm. Not silence, never silence. Instead, the quiet music of a frontier camp preparing itself for the longest hours of the night. You know the hardest part has not arrived yet. The wagon may now be arranged, the drafts may be reduced, the supplies may finally be tucked into every available corner, but a bare wooden floor remains exactly that. Soon you must build a bed from quilts, robes, straw, and imagination, hoping that a few carefully layered blankets will stand between your family and the bitter prairie cold waiting patiently just beyond the canvas. The empty floor does not stay empty for long. The moment the last crate is tucked into place, bundles of bedding begin appearing from every corner of the wagon. Each one has been protected with surprising care during the journey. Food is essential, certainly. Tools are irreplaceable. But when a winter night settles across the prairie, blankets become something close to treasure. You untie the first bundle. A quilt unfolds into your hands. Its colours are muted now beneath the fading light, but you can still make out neat squares stitched together months or perhaps years before this journey ever began. Someone sat beside a hearth far away, patiently sewing each piece with no idea that one day it would be spread across the floor of a wagon somewhere in the middle of a frozen prairie. That thought lingers with you. Every stitch carries a little piece of home. You shake the quilt gently. A faint smell of clean wool and cedar rises into the cold air. It is such an ordinary scent, yet tonight it feels almost luxurious. The first layer goes directly onto the wooden boards. It does not make the floor soft. Nothing could truly accomplish that. Instead, it creates a small barrier between sleeping bodies and timber that has spent the entire day absorbing winter's relentless chill. Another blanket follows, then another. Each layer promises just a little more warmth. Each one quietly whispers that tomorrow still exists. You smooth the fabric with the palm of your hand. Tiny frost crystals sparkle near the wagon entrance, where cold air slips inside whenever the flap is lifted. You brush them away. They return almost immediately. The prairie is persistent. You are learning to be persistent as well. Several first-hand accounts from westward emigrants mention that quilts were among the most valued possessions families carried. Many had been handmade by relatives before the journey began, serving not only as bedding but also as treasured reminders of loved ones left behind in the East. Looking at the careful stitching, it is easy to understand why. These are more than blankets. They are memories you can wrap around yourself. Someone passes you a buffalo robe. It is astonishingly heavy. The thick hide settles across the growing bed with a satisfying weight. The coarse hair still feels dense despite weeks of travel. You run your fingers through it. It is surprisingly warm. Buffalo robes had earned an excellent reputation on the frontier for good reason. Their natural insulation helped travellers endure conditions that would have quickly defeated lighter coverings. You silently thank the animal that once wore it. Its service has continued long after its own journey ended. Outside, the wind presses against the canvas again. This time the wagon hardly moves. The circle of wagons has done its work well. Not perfectly. Nothing can truly defeat a prairie blizzard, but well enough. The sounds outside have changed too. Earlier the camp buzzed with activity. Now conversations drift more slowly through the evening air. Someone tells a child a short story while folding clothing. A mother hums a tune almost too quietly to hear. Nearby, an older man coughs into the darkness before clearing his throat. The noises feel softer. The camp is settling. You remove your outer coat for only a moment while arranging bedding. The cold notices immediately. It slips through your shirt with remarkable speed. Within seconds you pull the coat back on. Lesson learned. There will be no unnecessary heroics tonight. One forgotten frontier custom involved warming smooth stones beside the evening fire before wrapping them in cloth and placing them beneath blankets. The stones slowly released their stored heat during the first hours of sleep. The practice required great care because stones heated too quickly or chosen from damp ground could crack unexpectedly. But when done properly, they offered a welcome bit of comfort during bitter nights. Unfortunately, suitable stones are not always easy to find beneath deep snow. You make do without them. Improvisation has become another travelling companion. A straw tick appears next. It is thinner than you expected. You had imagined something resembling a mattress. Instead, it feels more like a large cloth sack filled with dry straw. Still, compared with bare wagon boards, it is magnificent. You spread it carefully across the centre of the wagon. The straw shifts inside with a gentle rustling sound. Not perfectly even. One end bulges slightly higher than the other. You kneel and redistribute the filling with both hands. Better, not perfect. Good enough. That phrase returns often during frontier travel. Good enough. It may be the unofficial motto of every successful emigrant. The smell of dry straw mixes pleasantly with wool and leather. For a brief moment you close your eyes. The scent reminds you of barns, harvests, and quieter seasons. Memory arrives through the nose as easily as through the mind. You wonder if everyone around you is remembering home in their own way. Perhaps someone is thinking about an old farmhouse, another about a village street, someone else about a favourite chair beside a fireplace. The prairie allows room for such thoughts. Especially after dark, you begin arranging sleeping places, children toward the centre, adults closer to the edges where cold drafts are strongest. It seems sensible. The youngest deserve every possible advantage. Parents quietly agree without much discussion. No one argues, everyone understands. Modern researchers examining emigrant family diaries have noticed that sleeping arrangements often shifted from night to night depending on weather, available space, illness, or the age of the children. There was rarely one fixed pattern. Adaptation proved just as valuable as careful planning. Flexibility keeps people comfortable. Sometimes it keeps them alive. You roll spare clothing into small bundles, instant pillows, not elegant, perfectly practical. A folded coat supports one person's head. A bundle of extra shirts supports another. You briefly consider how expensive modern camping pillows can be. Then you glance at your wool socks stuffed inside a spare shirt. The frontier would probably find modern shopping catalogues rather entertaining. Outside, someone adds another piece of wood to the fire. The flames brighten for a few moments. Orange light filters softly through the pale canvas walls, making the inside of the wagon glow like a lantern. It is beautiful in a quiet way. The flickering light dances across quilts, wooden bows, leather straps, and tired faces. Everyone suddenly appears calmer, warmer too, even if only in appearance. The illusion is welcome. There are still boots to remove, not completely. Some travellers choose to loosen them rather than take them off entirely, worried that frozen leather may become difficult to pull on again before dawn. You understand the concern. Cold has a remarkable talent for turning simple tasks into complicated ones. Your feet finally rest upon the layered bedding. The difference is immediate. The floor still feels firm beneath everything. Yet the sharp bite of frozen wood has softened. You exhale slowly. Perhaps tonight will not be comfortable. Comfort is asking too much. but perhaps it will be survivable. That is enough. You pull one quilt over your knees while waiting for the others to finish arranging their places. Outside, the wind continues its endless conversation with the prairie. Inside, blankets, robes, straw, and familiar hands have built the closest thing to a bedroom that this frozen wilderness can offer. Soon everyone will climb inside together, bringing the last of the day's warmth with them, and the crowded little wagon will become not just a shelter from the storm, but a tiny island of shared hope surrounded by an ocean of snow. The bedding is finally in place. Now comes another challenge that feels just as important. Supper. No one expects a feast. Those expectations disappeared somewhere hundreds of miles back along the trail. Tonight the goal is wonderfully modest. Fill empty stomachs, warm cold hands, and perhaps lift tired spirits for a little while before everyone climbs into the wagon. You step back outside. The cold greets you immediately, as though it has been waiting patiently for your return. The fire sits near the center of the wagon circle, smaller than any campfire you would willingly build under ordinary circumstances. Every stick of wood has become valuable. Large flames may look cheerful, but they also consume precious fuel with alarming speed. So the fire burns low, carefully fed, closely watched. Its orange glow paints the surrounding snow with gentle shades of gold and amber. It almost makes the camp look cozy, almost. You kneel beside the flames, stretching your hands toward the warmth. The sensation is strange. Your palms grow pleasantly warm while your back remains bitterly cold. Turn around, and the situation reverses immediately. The prairie refuses to allow anyone the luxury of being warm all at once. It insists upon compromise. Someone hangs an iron pot above the fire. The metal is blackened from months of cooking over open flames. Soot coats the outside in uneven patches. The handle has become polished where countless hands have lifted it day after day. It is not beautiful. It is dependable. Dependable matters far more. Several emigrant journals describe how simple meals became the backbone of life on the trail. Flour, salt pork, beans, coffee, dried fruit, cornmeal, and bacon appeared again and again in surviving accounts because they travelled reasonably well and could last for long periods if carefully protected from moisture. Fresh vegetables have become distant memories. Warm bread from an oven belongs to another life. Tonight's supper begins with melting snow. You fill a bucket with clean white drifts gathered from beyond the camp. The bucket looks wonderfully full. You pour it into the pot. A few minutes later, it has become only a shallow pool of water. Snow has an impressive talent for making promises it cannot keep. You add another bucket, and another. The process feels almost ridiculous. You work so hard collecting great heaps of snow, only to receive a modest amount of water in return. Nature has a dry sense of humour. Steam slowly rises from the pot. Everyone watches. The sight alone feels encouraging, warmth made visible. Someone slices pieces of salt pork with careful precision. Nothing is wasted. Every portion is measured by experience rather than appetite. The meat sizzles as it reaches the hot iron. The sound instantly captures everyone's attention. After hours surrounded by wind and silence, even a gentle sizzle seems wonderfully lively. The smell follows next, rich, savoury, familiar. It drifts through the wagon circle, mixing with wood smoke and cold air until the entire camp seems to breathe more deeply. Hunger sharpens every sense. You'd almost forgotten how comforting cooking can smell. Nearby, another traveller stirs a pot of beans that have been soaking since earlier in the day. They cook slowly. thickening into a hearty mixture that promises warmth, if not excitement. Excitement is overrated. Warm beans are considerably more useful. One delightful little detail appears in several frontier memoirs. Some children became surprisingly skilled at judging whether supper was nearly ready simply by the colour of the steam rising from the cooking pots. Whether this reflected genuine observation or childhood imagination remains uncertain. But more than one adult later admitted that the young judges were often impressively accurate. You smile as one small boy leans toward the pot with exaggerated seriousness. He announces that supper smells finished. His mother laughs. The cook politely ignores his expert opinion for another few minutes. The waiting continues. You pull a tin cup from your supplies. It bears tiny dents collected over months of travel. Each mark tells a forgotten story. Perhaps one came from crossing a rocky stream, another from being dropped during a hurried breakfast, another from rattling against iron tools inside the wagon. Objects travel alongside people. They gather memories too. Coffee begins brewing in a smaller pot. Its aroma spreads quickly across the camp, strong, dark, slightly bitter. To modern tastes it might seem unusually robust. But after a freezing day on the prairie it smells almost miraculous. Not everyone drinks coffee. Of course. Children receive warm water or thin broth instead. Even plain hot water feels luxurious tonight. You wrap both hands around your cup. The heat travels slowly into stiff fingers. It almost hurts at first. Then relief follows. You had not realized just how cold your hands had become until feeling returned. An old trail anecdote tells of one emigrant who jokingly claimed that coffee should be counted as essential wagon equipment, somewhere between spare axle grease and ammunition. His companions reportedly laughed, then quietly agreed. Whether the conversation happened exactly that way is impossible to prove, but the sentiment certainly matches countless diary entries praising a hot drink after long days on the trail. The meal is served. There are no elaborate plates, no polished table, no embroidered cloth. People eat from simple bowls while standing or sitting on overturned buckets, wooden chests, or folded blankets placed carefully upon the snow. You take your first bite. It is hot enough to make you pause, then wonderfully satisfying. The beans are soft, the pork is salty. Together they create something far greater than the individual ingredients, not fancy. Not memorable for a cookbook, perfect for this evening. Conversation slowly returns. Someone comments that tomorrow's weather surely cannot be worse. Another gently replies that the prairie enjoys proving such statements wrong. Several people chuckle. The laughter feels genuine. Perhaps because nobody fully believes tomorrow's optimism. Perhaps because everyone wants to. Researchers continue comparing weather records with emigrant journals to better understand how travellers responded to prolonged winter storms, while the exact menus varied from company to company. The surviving evidence consistently shows that warm meals carried emotional value far beyond their nutritional importance. You understand why. This supper does more than quiet your hunger. It reminds you that normal life still exists, people still gather, they still share food. They still pass bowls from hand to hand, the storm may surround the camp, but it has not entered the circle completely. A child drops a spoon, it disappears into fresh snow. 3 adults immediately begin searching. The spoon is found within moments. It receives a triumphant cheer, entirely out of proportion to its size. Nobody finds this excessive. A spoon is a spoon. Losing one serves no useful purpose. The fire burns a little lower. Someone carefully places one final piece of wood onto the glowing coals. Not because more warmth would be unwelcome, simply because tomorrow will require fuel as well. Every decision quietly reaches into the future. Your bowl is empty now. You scrape the last beans with a piece of bread that has become slightly firm in the cold. Nothing remains, exactly as intended. The dishes are cleaned with remarkable efficiency. Very little water can be spared. Snow helps where it can. Clean cloth finishes the task. Within minutes, the cooking pots are packed away once again. The camp grows quieter. People pull coats tighter. Children yawn. Parents exchange tired glances that need no words. The fire settles into glowing embers. Above, the snow continues drifting across the dark prairie without hurry, as though it has all the time in the world. You rise, brush a few frozen flakes from your sleeves, and turn toward the waiting wagon. Inside. The carefully arranged quilts and buffalo robes promise the closest thing to comfort that this remarkable journey can offer. And beyond the canvas walls, another long winter night patiently waits to test every traveller before dawn. The last glow of the fire fades behind you as your attention shifts toward the animals. For a few precious minutes after supper, your own hunger has disappeared. Your hands have remembered what warmth feels like. The quilts waiting inside the wagon sound increasingly inviting. But the oxen cannot tuck themselves beneath blankets. The horses cannot tighten their own ropes. The cattle cannot explain if something is wrong. So before anyone thinks seriously about sleep, there is one more round of work waiting in the cold. You pull your coat snugly around your shoulders and step back into the snowy darkness. The wind greets you with familiar determination. It has not grown stronger. It has not weakened. It simply continues, as though it intends to keep blowing forever. Snow squeaks beneath your boots. That sound catches your attention. Fresh snow usually crunches. Tonight it squeaks. The colder the temperature becomes, the drier the snow grows, and the tiny crystals rub together with a faint, high-pitched sound that almost resembles rubbing two pieces of polished glass together. You had never noticed it before this journey. Now it seems impossible to ignore. The oxen stand close together inside the wagon circle. Their great bodies form a living wall against the cold. Steam rises steadily from their backs where snow settles and melts before freezing again around the edges of their thick coats. One animal slowly lifts its head as you approach. Its dark eyes reflect the dim firelight. Calm, patient, almost thoughtful. You reach out and rest a hand against its shoulder. Warm, far warmer than the frozen air surrounding both of you. You leave your hand there for a moment longer than necessary, not because the ox needs reassurance, because you do. Many trail journals describe the remarkable endurance of oxen during difficult crossings. Travelers often credited them with saving entire wagon companies through weather that exhausted horses much more quickly. They moved slowly, but they rarely wasted energy, a quality that proved invaluable on journeys measured in months rather than days. One of the drivers checks each yoke carefully. Leather straps, wooden pins, iron rings. Nothing can be allowed to fail during the night. Cold has an unpleasant habit of making ordinary materials behave in extraordinary ways. Leather stiffens, wood contracts. Knots that seemed perfectly secure at sunset sometimes loosen before dawn. You kneel beside one harness. A thin layer of frost coats the buckle. You scrape it away with your glove. The metal immediately bites at your fingertips. You pull your hand back with quiet respect. Iron has no sympathy for warm skin. Nearby, a horse stamps one front hoof several times before lowering its head to nose through the snow. Perhaps it hopes to find grass beneath. Perhaps it simply dislikes standing still. Its breath rises in broad white clouds that drift across the camp before disappearing into the darkness. The horses seem more restless than the oxen. Their ears twitch constantly. They shift from one leg to another. One gives a soft snort that echoes through the quiet camp. The oxen merely continue chewing. Their confidence feels contagious. There is an old trail story about a wagon master who insisted that if the oxen remained calm during a storm, the people should remain calm as well. He claimed the animals possessed better judgment than frightened travellers. Whether he truly believed that or simply wished to steady nervous companions is impossible to know, but the saying travelled with more than one emigrant company across the plains. Watching the broad animals now, you begin to understand the idea. They do not worry about tomorrow, they simply endure today. The smell surrounding them grows stronger as you move deeper into the circle. Warm animal breath, hay, leather, wool. A faint earthy scent rising from their heavy coats. It is surprisingly comforting. A modern stable would smell much the same. Some experiences ignore the passing of centuries. A younger traveller carries another armful of hay toward the animals. Not much, just enough for an evening feeding. The hay disappears quickly beneath eager mouths. Every stalk matters. There will be no careless waste. The journey has already taught everyone that supplies disappear faster than expected. You brush loose snow from one ox's broad back. Almost immediately fresh flakes settle in the same place. Nature politely informs you that your efforts are temporary. You continue anyway. Sometimes temporary comfort is still worthwhile. A small calf presses close against its mother. Its coat appears fluffier than the adults, though appearances can be deceiving beneath drifting snow. The mother barely moves except to nudge the calf gently with her nose. The little one settles even closer. No words, no fuss, just quiet instinct. Several surviving letters from emigrant families mention how closely children watch the livestock during difficult weather. Many young travellers quickly learned that the health of the animals often determined whether the entire company could continue west. Losing an ox was not simply losing an animal. It could mean losing precious time, abandoning supplies, or changing carefully made plans. That knowledge gave even the youngest members of a wagon train an unusually practical view of responsibility. You notice one rope rubbing against a wooden post. Not enough to break tonight. Eventually. Perhaps. You adjust it slightly. The rope now hangs with less tension. A small improvement. One less thing to worry about. Or at least one less thing until morning. The camp grows quieter with every passing minute. Conversations become whispers. Doors of wooden chests close with muffled thumps. The last cooking pot is finally stored away. Somewhere a baby lets out a brief cry before settling again. The wind carries the sound only a short distance before swallowing it. Researchers examining frontier diaries have pointed out that descriptions of livestock often reveal as much about the people writing as about the animals themselves. Some writers listed practical details with almost mathematical precision. Others described individual oxen and horses with genuine affection, giving them names and distinct personalities. Perhaps both approaches were true. Animals could be tools. Animals could also become trusted companions. Long journeys have a way of blurring those distinctions. You pause near the edge of the wagon circle and look outward. Beyond the nearest drifting snow lies complete darkness. No fences, no roads, no welcoming lights from distant houses. Only the endless prairie hidden beneath winter. It feels unimaginably vast. The camp itself seems tiny. A handful of wagons, a few glowing embers, several patient animals, dozens of people hoping morning will arrive safely, nothing more, nothing less. The realization does not frighten you quite as much as it might have earlier. Perhaps exhaustion has softened your worries. Perhaps shared work has done the same. You return to the ox you greeted earlier. It blinks slowly. Its steady breathing continues without interruption. You scratch gently behind one ear. The animal accepts the attention with quiet dignity before returning to its hay. No dramatic friendship, no sentimental moment, simply two weary travellers sharing the same difficult night. Your own eyelids suddenly feel heavier. The warmth from supper has begun fading. The cold quietly reclaims its territory. The quilts waiting inside the wagon no longer sound merely inviting. They sound essential. You give the camp one final look. The animals are fed. The ropes are secure. The wagon circle rests beneath a veil of gently falling snow, satisfied that everything is as safe as it can reasonably be. You turn toward the waiting canvas shelter, where an overcrowded sleeping space and a very long winter night are about to become your entire world until dawn. The rear flap of the wagon hangs open just long enough for another swirl of snow to tumble inside. You brush it away with your sleeve. It is becoming something of a nightly ritual. Snow enters, you remove it. The snow returns. The prairie seems determined to become an uninvited travelling companion. You duck your head beneath the canvas and climb carefully into the wagon. Immediately the world changes. Outside, the wind has room to roar across miles of open land. Inside, every sound feels closer, softer, and strangely personal. The canvas muffles the worst of the storm until it becomes a steady breathing sound that surrounds the wagon instead of crashing directly into it. It almost resembles waves washing against the side of a ship. The nickname Prairie Schooner returns once more. Only now you feel less like a passenger and more like part of the cargo. The space is remarkably small. You knew it would be. Still, actually seeing everyone gathered inside somehow makes it feel even smaller than memory suggested. Quilts cover the floor. Buffalo robes lie across the bedding. Bundles of clothing have become pillows. Wooden chests line the front of the wagon. Barrels occupy corners where no person could comfortably fit. Every object has been persuaded to surrender just enough room for another elbow, another shoulder, another pair of tired feet. Nothing is wasted, not even empty air. You ease yourself onto the bedding. The straw tick rustles beneath your weight. It is certainly firmer than any mattress from home. Yet after a day of walking through snow, it feels surprisingly welcoming. Comfort, you're discovering, has a remarkable ability to adjust its standards. One diary written by an emigrant woman described evenings inside the wagon as resembling a careful puzzle in which every piece must settle exactly where it belongs. Reading those words today, it is difficult to imagine a more accurate description. You shift slightly, someone else shifts, a child rolls over. The entire arrangement subtly rearranges itself. Sleeping here requires cooperation before anyone has even closed their eyes. You remove your gloves. Slowly. Your fingers have finally regained feeling after supper, though they remain stiff from the cold. You flex them several times before tucking them beneath the blanket. Warmth arrives gradually, not enough to banish the chill, just enough to remind you that warmth still exists somewhere in the world. A little girl yawns so widely that everyone nearby smiles. Her mother gently pulls another quilt across her shoulders. Within moments, the child curls against her older sister. Children possess a remarkable talent for falling asleep almost anywhere, Adults tend to overthink the process. Tonight, your own thoughts seem determined to remain awake. You glance upward. The wooden boughs supporting the canvas curve overhead in neat arches. Tiny droplets of frozen moisture cling to the fabric. Every so often, one melts slightly from the warmth inside before freezing again. The roof quietly sparkles whenever the firelight outside flickers through the canvas. It almost looks like a small winter sky. The smell inside the wagon grows richer as everyone settles. Wool blankets, leather boots, dry straw, faint cedar from the storage chest, a trace of smoke carried in on coats. The comforting scent of the evening meal still lingers ever so slightly. It smells crowded. It smells tired. It smells alive. Travel journals from the Oregon Trail often mention that families became accustomed to sharing remarkably small spaces for months at a time. Privacy, as most people understand it today, became a rare luxury. Instead, travelers learned to value companionship, patience, and quiet consideration for one another. You discover exactly what that means as someone carefully apologizes for brushing your shoulder while adjusting a blanket. You answer with a quiet smile. No offense taken. There simply is nowhere else for anyone to move. One amusing frontier saying claimed that after enough weeks on the trail. Every family member could identify another's elbow in complete darkness. The remark was meant as a joke. Judging by the current conditions, it may not have been entirely exaggerated. You pull your boots slightly closer to the bedding without removing them completely. The leather feels cold against your hands. Many experienced travellers preferred loosening boots instead of taking them off entirely during freezing weather. Frozen leather could stiffen overnight, making the morning routine considerably more unpleasant than anyone wished. Morning already sounds complicated enough. Outside. Another strong gust presses against the wagon. The canvas bows inward before returning to its usual shape. Nobody reacts. By now everyone recognizes the difference between ordinary movement and genuine danger. This is merely another conversation between wind and cloth. The wagon itself answers with a gentle creak. The sound is oddly reassuring. Strong wood always speaks a little. Silence from old timber might actually be more concerning. A baby begins fussing somewhere near the centre of the bedding. Not loudly. Just enough to announce dissatisfaction with the current arrangements. A mother gently rocks the child while whispering soft words almost too quiet to hear. The crying fades. Soon, only slow breathing remains. You notice how darkness changes people's faces. The harsh lines created by wind and cold soften beneath the dim glow filtering through the canvas. Everyone looks younger somehow, or perhaps simply more peaceful. Exhaustion has replaced worry for the moment. A man across from you quietly massages one aching knee before pulling a blanket over his legs. No one comments. Every person inside the wagon has discovered new muscles during today's journey. Researchers studying pioneer journals have observed that physical discomfort was mentioned surprisingly matter-of-factly, instead of dwelling on sore backs or cramped sleeping positions. Many writers recorded them almost as ordinary facts of daily life, much like mentioning the weather or the distance travelled. Perhaps people become accustomed to nearly anything if it continues long enough. Your shoulder presses gently against the wagon wall. The wood feels cold through several layers of clothing. You shift closer toward the centre. Someone else does exactly the same. A silent negotiation begins, half an inch here, another inch there. Eventually everyone reaches an arrangement that seems acceptable. Not perfect, simply workable. That's enough. You pull the buffalo robe higher. Its comforting weight settles across your legs. Immediately the warmth improves, not dramatically, just steadily. like placing another log onto a quiet fire. Outside, the camp has become almost completely silent. The fire has faded into glowing embers. The oxen occasionally snort or shuffle their hooves. A horse shakes its mane somewhere beyond the wagon wall. Otherwise, the prairie belongs entirely to the wind. You listen carefully. There is something almost hypnotic about its endless rhythm. It rises. It falls. It circles the wagon. It drifts away. Then it returns once more. The pattern repeats until your breathing gradually begins matching its pace. Slow, steady, unhurried. You close your eyes for a moment. The darkness feels deeper inside the wagon than outside. Your body welcomes the chance to rest, but your mind remains gently alert, still adjusting to every unfamiliar sound and every tiny movement from the people sleeping beside you. The longest part of the night has only just begun. Soon the wagon will settle into its own quiet rhythm of creaking wood, shifting blankets, whispered dreams, and the endless music of the winter prairie beyond the canvas walls, where sleep will prove to be both a comfort and a challenge before the first light of morning finally returns. You close your eyes for a few hopeful seconds. You imagine that exhaustion will simply carry you into sleep. After all, you have spent the entire day walking through snow, lifting supplies, helping with the animals, and fighting a wind that seemed determined to push you backward across the prairie. Surely your body has earned a full night's rest. The prairie has other ideas. Sleep does not arrive all at once. It circles cautiously, much like the wind outside, each time you begin drifting. Another sound gently pulls you back toward wakefulness. The canvas speaks first. A long, soft ripple travels from one end of the wagon to the other as another gust passes over the roof. The fabric stretches, settles, then flutters again in a slightly different rhythm. It reminds you of someone slowly shaking out a very large blanket. Only this blanket happens to be above your head. You had never imagined cloth could produce so many different voices. Sometimes it rustles, sometimes it snaps, sometimes it hums so quietly that you almost mistake it for your own breathing. Then the wagon answers. A beam gives a low groan. One wheel shifts ever so slightly against the frozen ground. A wooden peg lets out a tiny click. None of the sounds suggest danger. They are simply the ordinary language of timber adjusting to cold, weight, and constant wind. Experienced travellers often became remarkably familiar with these nighttime noises. A few diary entries even describe people recognizing individual creaks from particular wagons, much as someone today might recognize the familiar sounds of an old house settling after sunset. You wonder if that would happen to you after another month on the trail. Perhaps it already has. You listen more carefully. There, the short creak near your left shoulder. That one always comes after a stronger gust. The longer groan beneath your feet. That seems to follow whenever someone shifts position. Already the wagon is becoming familiar, not silent, predictable. There is comfort in predictability. Beside you, someone rolls onto the opposite side. The straw beneath the bedding whispers softly. A quilt slides a few inches. Another sleeper instinctively pulls it back into place without fully waking. The movement lasts only moments. Soon everyone is still again. Outside, one of the horses gives a sudden snort. The sound is surprisingly loud through the quiet night. A second horse answers from somewhere beyond the circle of wagons. Then everything settles once more. You picture them standing beneath the falling snow, ears turning toward every distant sound. Animals sleep differently, always ready, always listening. The smell inside the wagon changes slightly as the hours pass. The warmth created by several sleeping bodies has softened the sharp scent of frozen air. Now you notice wool more clearly, leather, straw, a faint trace of wood smoke clinging to blankets. Even the cedar chest near the front releases a gentle fragrance that somehow survives despite the cold. The entire wagon smells like patient endurance. One old trail journal contains a surprisingly cheerful complaint from a traveller who wrote that the loudest member of the wagon company was not a child or an ox, but a squeaky wheel that seemed determined to sing through every night until someone finally found enough grease to quiet it. Judging from the humour in the account, the writer eventually considered the noise almost reassuring. You smile to yourself. Every journey probably develops its own soundtrack. Tonight yours includes quite a collection. A quiet cough, the flutter of canvas, the sigh of the wind, the steady breathing of tired companions, the distant stamping of hooves, the occasional crackle from embers outside that refuse to surrender completely. None of these sounds are particularly loud. Together they create a gentle chorus that never fully disappears. You pull the buffalo robe slightly higher around your shoulders. It has slipped during the last few minutes. Cold air notices the smallest opportunity. It creeps into every opening with astonishing determination. You tuck one corner beneath your arm. Much better. Not warm, simply less cold. That feels like progress. A tiny droplet falls from the canvas overhead. It lands quietly upon your sleeve. You look upward. Condensation. The warmth inside the wagon has melted a little frost before the moisture gathered into a single drop. Soon it will freeze again. Several first-hand descriptions from winter travellers mention this curious problem. Moisture created by breathing often collected inside tightly closed wagons during bitter weather. Families learned to balance warmth with ventilation, opening small gaps whenever conditions allowed so damp air could escape. It was never an easy decision. Too much fresh air invited the cold. Too little encouraged dampness. Both carried their own discomforts. The wagon shifts gently beneath another passing gust. Not enough to rock, just enough for you to notice. It feels almost like a boat resting upon slow waves. Perhaps that famous nickname earned its place after all. You begin counting the sounds. 1. Wind. 2. Canvas. 3. Someone breathing deeply. 4. A horse moving outside. 5. The quiet rustle of straw. The exercise becomes strangely calming. Your thoughts slow. The rhythm settles your mind, just as your eyelids begin growing heavy again. Another traveller whispers softly into the darkness. Are you awake? The question is directed toward a family member nearby. A sleepy voice answers, only a little. Neither speaks again. The brief exchange somehow makes the wagon feel even smaller, not cramped, connected. Everyone shares the same long night. Nobody faces it alone. There was a gentle piece of frontier folklore suggesting that storms sounded louder to people who feared them. Older travellers sometimes reassured nervous children by saying that the wind was only trying to tell stories across the prairie, and that strong wagons knew how to listen without becoming frightened. It is a comforting thought. You decide to borrow it. Outside. The wind is not threatening you. It is simply telling another endless story. Researchers comparing emigrant memoirs with journals written during the journey have noticed something interesting. Memories recorded years later often described stormy nights as louder and more dramatic than accounts written at the time. Whether memory amplified the experience or immediate exhaustion softened it remains impossible to determine with certainty. Perhaps both are true. Perhaps tonight will sound different when remembered many years from now. Your shoulder has finally found a comfortable position, at least comfortable by frontier standards. Your feet are gradually warming beneath the layered blankets. The stiffness in your back eases little by little. Someone nearby begins to snore, very softly, then slightly louder. No one complains. The sound almost blends with the wind. Almost. You find yourself smiling again. Even on the frozen prairie, with snow drifting across an endless landscape and tomorrow's journey still uncertain. Ordinary human habits continue exactly as they always have. People sigh, people snore, people murmur in their sleep. Children clutch blankets. Parents quietly check that everyone remains covered. Life keeps moving through the smallest moments. Your breathing slows until it matches the quiet rhythm filling the wagon. The sounds that once seemed determined to keep you awake no longer feel like interruptions. They have become companions. The voice of old wood, the whisper of canvas, the breathing of those around you, the patient wind beyond the wagon walls. Together they form a lullaby unlike any you have ever known, gently carrying you toward the uncertain edge of sleep as the long prairie night continues unfolding one quiet sound at a time. The warmth you manage to gather before climbing into the wagon does not disappear all at once. It leaves slowly, almost politely. At first, your hands still feel comfortable beneath the blankets. Your shoulders have relaxed against the rolled clothing serving as a pillow. The straw tick no longer seems especially firm. Even the endless whisper of the wind has settled into the background of your thoughts. For a little while, you almost believe the night will be easier than expected. Then the cold begins its quiet work. It never rushes. It simply waits. A tiny draft slips beneath the edge of the buffalo robe and brushes your ankle. A few minutes later, another finds the space between your sleeve and glove. Before long, you notice that the tip of your nose has grown chilly again. The wagon is closed. The blankets are thick. Everyone is tucked close together. Yet winter always discovers another path inside. You pull your knees slightly closer to your chest. The movement steals very little room from anyone else because nearly everyone has curled into the same position. Long limbs demand space that simply does not exist. Curled bodies fit more easily. Your grandmother, if she lived through a winter like this, would probably nod with quiet approval. The wagon breathes around you, not literally of course, but it certainly feels alive. Warm air gathers beneath the canvas, rises toward the roof, cools against the frozen fabric, then slowly drifts downward again. You cannot see the movement, only sense it across your face. The air itself seems to wander. Your fingertips find the edge of the quilt. The stitching beneath your thumb feels wonderfully familiar. Small ridges cross from square to square where careful hands joined one piece of fabric to another. The thread has survived countless washings, weeks of travel, and now one relentless prairie storm. It has become stronger than anyone expected. Perhaps people do the same. You wonder how many evenings this quilt has already witnessed. Children sleeping beside fireplaces, summer picnics spread across green fields, long wagon days ending beneath clear autumn skies. Now this, another chapter stitched quietly into its history. A small movement beside you interrupts the thought. Someone has turned over in sleep. The bedding shifts gently. For a moment, a narrow stream of cold air slips beneath the blankets before everyone unconsciously settles back together. Warmth returns. Not much. Enough. One emigrant woman later recalled that families often woke to find frost decorating the inside of their wagon covers after bitter nights. She compared the delicate white patterns to lace hanging above their heads. a surprisingly graceful image considering the difficult circumstances. You look upward. Tiny crystals sparkle where the faint glow from the dying campfire filters through the canvas. She had not exaggerated. They really do resemble lace. Beautiful, completely unwelcome. A single flake breaks loose and lands quietly upon your blanket. It melts almost instantly. The cold reaches your feet next, not sharply, slowly. Your boots remain loosened but still on your feet. They protect your toes from the freezing floor, yet leather offers only limited comfort after many hours in low temperatures. You wiggle your toes, they answer. That is reassuring. You wiggle them again a few minutes later, still answering good. Outside, a horse paws gently at the snow. You hear the muted scrape through the wagon wall. Perhaps it dreams of finding frozen grass. Perhaps standing still simply becomes uncomfortable after so many hours. Whatever the reason. The sound fades almost as quickly as it appeared. Silence settles once more. Or rather, the particular kind of silence that exists on the prairie. Never empty, always layered. Wind, breathing, canvas, wood, snow brushing softly against the wagon sides. Each sound occupies its own place without disturbing the others. An elderly traveller once joked that the cold had excellent manners because it never knocked before entering. It simply invited itself inside and made everyone aware of its presence. The remark survived because it captured exactly what frontier winters felt like. Tonight you understand the joke completely. No invitation was requested. None was needed. You pull the buffalo robe higher until only your eyes remain uncovered. Warm breath escapes upward. For a moment your eyelashes gather tiny droplets of moisture. You blink several times before they can freeze together. That possibility alone is enough to keep you alert for another minute or two. Across the wagon a quiet whisper reaches your ears. Someone asks if another blanket is available. There is one. It changes hands with slow, careful movements so nobody else is disturbed. No one complains. Blankets belong to everyone tonight. Comfort becomes a shared responsibility. Inventories left behind by wagon companies reveal how highly people valued wool compared with lighter fabrics during long journeys. Wool remained useful even after becoming slightly damp, something cotton could rarely claim under the same conditions. Experienced travelers learn this lesson quickly. Sometimes after one miserable evening, you silently thank every sheep that contributed to the quilt wrapped around your shoulders. Its efforts continue long after the flock has wandered elsewhere. Time becomes difficult to measure. The darkness never changes. The wind offers few clues. You suspect an hour has passed. Perhaps 2. Perhaps only 20 minutes. Without clocks or bright moonlight. The night stretches into one long, unbroken moment. You begin paying attention to smaller sensations. The rough weave of the blanket beneath your fingertips, the faint tickle of loose straw pressing through the fabric below, the gentle weight of another sleeper's shoulder resting against yours. None of them would matter in daylight. Now each one feels surprisingly important. Your body has become an expert observer. It notices everything. There is another soft tap overhead, then another. Snow slipping from the canvas roof, not falling from the sky, sliding downward after gathering into a heavier layer. The sound repeats every so often, a gentle reminder that the storm continues building its quiet world outside. Old letters from frontier settlements sometimes describe these nights as exercises in patience rather than courage. Courage suggested dramatic moments. Patience described the truth much more accurately. enduring hour after hour of cold, discomfort, and uncertainty demanded a different sort of strength. You think that may be one of the wisest observations you have encountered on this journey. Nothing dramatic is happening, nothing exciting. You're simply waiting for warmth, waiting for dawn, waiting for the first hint that another day has arrived. Your breathing grows slower, the ache in your back softens, your feet, though still cool, no longer seem painfully cold. The layers of bedding have finally trapped enough warmth to create a tiny pocket of comfort around your body. It is fragile, delicate, easy to lose, yet undeniably real. Outside, the prairie remains hidden beneath darkness and drifting snow. Inside, the wagon holds its small collection of weary travellers close together. The cold still presses from every direction, searching patiently for another opening. But for now the quilts, robes, timber, canvas, and quiet determination of everyone inside continue holding it back. One slow breath at a time, as the longest hours of the winter night quietly pass across the frozen plains. At some point during the night, you stop thinking of the blankets as separate layers. They become one heavy shelter, a quilt, a buffalo robe, a folded coat, a wool shawl tucked around someone's shoulders. Together they settle over the wagon like a second roof. Softer than the canvas above, but every bit as important. You wake without fully opening your eyes. Something has changed, not the weather, not the wind, the warmth. It has shifted ever so slightly as sleeping bodies have moved during the night. One child has rolled away from the centre. Another has pulled part of a blanket with surprising determination, despite being sound asleep. An adult quietly notices the gap almost at once, without a word. Careful hands tug the quilt back into place. No one needs instructions. By now everyone understands the routine. The youngest stay warm first. The rest of you make whatever adjustments are necessary. You open your eyes just enough to see the dim outline of familiar faces. The wagon is darker than before. The last glow from the campfire outside has disappeared. Only a pale wash of moonlight filters faintly through the canvas whenever the clouds thin for a moment. It is barely enough to separate shapes from shadows. Even so, you recognize everyone. The curve of a hat hanging from a wooden peg, a rolled blanket against the front chest, the outline of boots lined neatly beside the bedding. You smile to yourself. Order has survived another evening. Not perfect order, frontier order. Good enough to find what matters when morning comes. Your shoulder has gone pleasantly numb beneath the weight of another sleeper leaning against you. You consider moving, then decide against it. The other person is finally resting peacefully. That seems worth a slightly uncomfortable shoulder. Small kindnesses become surprisingly easy when everyone shares the same hardship. The air inside the wagon feels different now, warmer than outside by a considerable margin, yet carrying a faint dampness created by hours of quiet breathing. You notice tiny beads of moisture clinging to the canvas near one corner. They glisten briefly whenever a trace of light slips through. Soon they will freeze again, then melt, then freeze once more. The wagon has developed its own little weather. Many family journals from westward journeys mention waking to find the inside of the wagon damp despite bitter temperatures outdoors. It became one more challenge to manage. Blankets needed airing whenever the sun appeared, even in winter, because trapped moisture slowly stole warmth from the very bedding meant to protect it. The lesson was simple. Dry fabric was warmer fabric. You hear someone breathing through a slightly blocked nose. Another sleeper sighs deeply before settling into a quieter rhythm, near your feet. A child murmurs a few words that make no sense. Dreams have wandered into the wagon. You wonder what children dream about after weeks on the trail. Perhaps familiar homes, perhaps endless grasslands, perhaps warm kitchens where supper appears without gathering firewood first. The thought makes you quietly laugh, only inside your own mind. Of course, no one else needs waking. Your left hand slips free from beneath the blanket. Within moments, cool air wraps around your fingers. The difference is immediate. You tuck your hand back beneath the quilt with renewed appreciation. It is remarkable how quickly the body begins protecting every bit of warmth it can gather. An elderly pioneer later told his grandchildren that sleeping on the trail taught him to value elbows. The children naturally looked puzzled. He explained that an elbow tucked beneath a blanket could keep surprising amounts of warmth from escaping. And after enough cold nights, a person developed great respect for such ordinary joints. It sounds like the sort of story children politely listen to while secretly hoping for pirates instead. Yet lying here tonight, you completely understand his point. Even elbows have their purpose. Outside, the wind softens for a while, not completely, just enough that new sounds emerge. You hear the slow chewing of an ox somewhere beyond the wagon. A leather strap creaks gently. Snow slides from one side of the canvas roof with a muffled whisper. The prairie has not become silent. It has simply rearranged its orchestra. The breathing inside the wagon grows almost rhythmic. Different ages, different lungs, different tempos. Together they form a quiet chorus that somehow steadies your own breathing. You had expected crowded sleeping quarters to feel restless. Instead, they create a surprising sense of reassurance. Every familiar sound means someone is still there, still warm, still safe enough to sleep. A tiny movement beside you catches your attention. The youngest child has kicked free of part of the bedding. One small foot now rests outside the quilt, before you can even think about reaching over. The child's mother gently guides the blanket back into place without opening her eyes. Practice, nothing more. She has probably performed the same motion hundreds of times. Parenthood does not pause simply because the address has changed to covered wagon somewhere on the prairie. Supplies carried across the plains often included knitted wool caps reserved especially for sleeping. Travellers discovered that keeping the head covered during freezing nights made a noticeable difference in comfort, especially for children whose smaller bodies lost heat more quickly. You reach up and touch your own cap. Still in place. That is one less thing to worry about. Time drifts onward. You stop trying to measure it. The night has its own pace, and it pays very little attention to human impatience. Somewhere beyond the wagon walls, snow continues falling, not with the angry force of earlier. Now it seems almost thoughtful. Each flake settles quietly upon countless others, slowly reshaping the prairie while nobody watches. Tomorrow morning the landscape may appear entirely different. The hills, the wagon tracks, even the camp itself. Everything softened beneath fresh white layers. A woman across from you quietly rubs warmth back into her hands before pulling them beneath the blanket again. The movement lasts only seconds, then stillness returns. Nobody complains. Nobody asks how much longer until sunrise. There would be no useful answer. The frontier has a curious way of changing ordinary conversations. Instead of asking what time it is, people begin wondering whether the fire can be restarted easily. Instead of discussing tomorrow's appointments, they think about the condition of the oxen. Life becomes wonderfully practical. You find something peaceful in that simplicity. The worries of distant towns seem impossibly far away. There are no crowded streets here, no shop windows, no church bells. Only this wagon, these blankets, these people, this endless prairie hidden beneath the darkness. You notice your breathing has become slower again. The ache in your legs has almost disappeared beneath the steady warmth trapped inside the bedding. Your eyelids grow heavier. This time they stay closed. The wind continues its patient conversation with the canvas, but it no longer demands your attention. The gentle rise and fall of sleeping companions surrounds you like another blanket. The closeness that seemed awkward earlier in the evening has become comforting. No one has much personal space, yet everyone shares something far more valuable: the warmth of another human being refusing to let the cold claim any more of the night than it already has. Wrapped together beneath quilts stitched by careful hands, protected by old timber and weathered canvas, you finally drift deeper into sleep, while outside the frozen prairie quietly keeps its watch until the first uncertain hints of morning begin their long journey across the snow. You are not entirely certain what wakes you. For a moment you remain perfectly still. Your eyes stay closed. Your breathing remains slow. You listen. The wagon feels different. Not warmer, not colder, simply different. Then you hear it, a short, dull thump somewhere outside. It is followed by another sound, a rope pulling tight against wood. The noise is faint, but every traveller inside the wagon has spent enough weeks on the trail to recognize when something deserves attention. One pair of eyes opens, then another. Nobody panics. Panic belongs to people who still believe loud movements solve quiet problems. Experience has taught everyone otherwise. The man nearest the rear flap slowly sits upright, careful not to disturb the children sleeping nearby. Every movement is deliberate. A hurried elbow could wake half the wagon. You ease yourself onto one elbow. The blankets immediately try to slide away. Cold air slips inside before you catch the edge of the quilt and pull it back into place. Amazing. The cold has somehow remained awake all night. Outside comes another scrape, longer this time. A horse gives a restless snort. The sound is enough. The man beside the flap reaches for his boots, not because he enjoys the thought of stepping into a blizzard before dawn, because waiting too long can allow a small problem to become a much larger one. You quietly reach for your own coat. If another pair of hands is needed, you would rather already be dressed than scramble in freezing darkness later. The wagon remains almost silent. Only the soft rustle of wool breaks the stillness. No one speaks above a whisper. Words seem strangely loud during the deepest hour of the night. The rear flap opens just enough for a ribbon of icy air to sweep inside. Every person feels it instantly. Several sleepers instinctively pull blankets closer without fully waking. The cold needs only the smallest invitation. It enters eagerly. The flap closes again behind the two figures climbing outside. Darkness returns. You listen, footsteps crunch across fresh snow, a quiet murmur, another horse snorts. Then the sound of a leather being pulled tight. You picture the scene without seeing it. Lantern light swaying gently, snowflakes drifting through the glow, gloved hands checking harnesses one buckle at a time. Surviving trail accounts often mention that nighttime inspections were simply part of winter travel. Wind could loosen knots, drifting snow might bury equipment, and restless animals occasionally tangled their own lead ropes. These checks were rarely dramatic. They were ordinary acts of caution repeated over and over across the long journey west. Inside the wagon, everyone waits. The waiting somehow feels longer than the work itself. You notice the silence between the sounds. It has changed. Earlier in the evening, the wind never seemed to pause. Now there are moments, brief but noticeable, when everything becomes almost completely still. The storm has not ended. It is merely catching its breath. Your fingers brush against the wooden side of the wagon. The timber feels colder than the blankets, but not as bitterly cold as before. Perhaps the wagon has slowly absorbed a little warmth from everyone sleeping inside. Perhaps your hands have simply adjusted. Either explanation seems reasonable. You hear a quiet laugh outside, only one, very brief. Then someone says, "Found it." Curiosity stirs. A few moments later, the flap opens again. Snowflakes tumble into the wagon before the opening closes. It was only a loose feed sack. Someone whispers. It kept slapping the side. Several people release the breath they had apparently been holding. Such relief comes easily on the frontier. Not because the danger was enormous, because it was not. Small problems staying small feels like its own kind of blessing. One traveller brushes fresh snow from his shoulders before settling back beneath the blankets. Tiny crystals sparkle briefly before melting into the wool. He carefully wipes away the moisture with a dry cloth. Nobody wants damp bedding. That lesson has already been learned. An amusing recollection written decades after one prairie crossing described how a single empty bucket escaped during a windy night. 3 determined adults chased it across the snow, while everyone else watched from the wagons, trying very hard not to laugh. The bucket, according to the storyteller, seemed convinced it could reach Oregon without any assistance. You imagine the stubborn bucket rolling proudly across the moonlit prairie. Even now the image makes you smile. Frontier life collected funny memories in the most inconvenient moments. The wagon settles once more, bodies shift, blankets are tucked. Someone quietly clears a throat. The ordinary rhythm returns, outside, however. Another task continues. A lantern moves from wagon to wagon. Its light appears faintly through the canvas as a soft golden glow. It passes, disappears, returns again from another direction, like a patient firefly drifting through the storm. No one inside speaks while the light travels around the camp. Everyone understands the reason. Every wagon deserves a quick inspection. Every family deserves the reassurance that nothing unexpected has happened while they slept. Old blacksmith records from frontier settlements occasionally mention replacing surprisingly large numbers of iron fittings after severe winters. Cold, constant strain, and repeated freezing placed enormous stress upon metal parts that looked perfectly sound during warmer months. It reminds you that even sturdy wagons quietly aged with every mile. The prairie demanded payment in small pieces. One bolt, one hinge, one wheel rim. Nothing lasted forever. You become aware of another sound. Not outside. Inside. Someone softly humming. The tune lasts only a few seconds before fading. Perhaps the person was not fully awake. Perhaps the melody belonged to a dream. Whatever the reason, it leaves behind a feeling of unexpected peace. The wind returns, gentler now. It brushes across the canvas rather than striking it. The difference is subtle but unmistakable. The wagon no longer shivers with every passing gust. Instead, it gives the occasional quiet creak, almost like an old rocking chair settling beneath familiar weight. Your breathing slows again. You realize your heart had been beating a little faster after hearing those first mysterious noises. Now it finds its calmer rhythm once more. Outside. Boots crunch softly toward the wagon. The inspection is finished. Everything appears secure. The horses are standing quietly. The oxen remain calm. The ropes are holding. The feed sacks are tied down properly. For tonight, that is enough. The flap opens one final time. A careful hand brushes loose snow away before climbing inside. Cold air follows for only a moment before the blankets close once more around everyone. Warmth begins rebuilding itself almost immediately. Several travellers instinctively edge a little closer together without exchanging a single word. Shared body heat becomes another invisible layer covering the wagon. It cannot be folded. It cannot be packed, yet it proves just as valuable as every quilt surrounding you. You settle deeper into your place. The rolled coat beneath your head has flattened during the night, but it still supports your neck well enough. Your shoulders finally relax. The brief interruption has passed. No disaster arrived. No frantic repairs became necessary. Only another reminder that life on the prairie depends upon countless quiet acts of attention carried out while most people sleep. Beyond the canvas walls, the snow continues drifting over the sleeping camp, smoothing footprints, softening wagon tracks, and patiently reshaping the landscape for the morning that still waits somewhere beyond the darkness. The wagon grows quiet again. Not the kind of quiet you find inside an empty room. This is a living quiet. Someone breathes a little faster after returning from outside. A child lets out a tiny sigh before settling deeper beneath the blankets. Wood answers the changing weight with a faint murmur. Beyond the canvas, the wind has grown tired enough to whisper instead of shout. You lie still. Your eyes remain open for a while. Darkness has become familiar. Earlier in the evening, every shadow seemed uncertain. Every unexpected sound asked a question. Now the wagon has introduced itself properly. You know where the storage chest rests. You know which bow above your head creaks whenever the wind presses against the canvas. You know exactly how far you can stretch one leg before gently bumping into someone else's boots. The place has become strangely ordinary. That surprises you. Human beings have an astonishing talent for adapting. You imagine someone from a comfortable town seeing this wagon for the first time. They would probably wonder how anyone could possibly sleep here. Yet here you are, not sleeping perfectly, not sleeping deeply, but sleeping well enough. Perhaps well enough deserves more respect than it usually receives. A faint scratching sound reaches your ears. You freeze for a moment. The sound comes again. Scratch. Pause. Scratch. You wait. No one else seems alarmed. Finally you realize what it is. Tree branches. Or rather, one stubborn little shrub that the drifting wagon settled beside earlier in the evening. Whenever the wind bends its frozen stems, they brush gently against the lower edge of the wagon. The mystery disappears. The scratching becomes almost comforting. It is remarkable how quickly fear can dissolve once it has a name. The darkness invites old thoughts. Without busy work to occupy your hands, your mind begins wandering across many miles. You remember the home left behind. A doorway, a wooden table, morning light through familiar windows, the smell of fresh bread. Those memories arrive without warning. They never ask permission. You wonder whether everyone else lying nearby has travelled back to old kitchens and old gardens in their own thoughts. Perhaps homes become even clearer after leaving them. A woman who crossed the plains years later wrote that she remembered ordinary evenings more vividly than holidays or celebrations. She missed washing dishes with her sisters, sweeping a floor she had once considered dull, and hearing rain on a roof that never leaked. Distance had quietly polished the simplest memories until they shone. That feels entirely believable. You would happily sweep that old floor tonight. Outside, snow continues falling, not heavily, just steadily. It lands so softly that you almost imagine the prairie pulling another blanket across itself. Everything beyond the wagon is disappearing beneath fresh white layers. Wheel tracks, footprints, even the little path leading toward the animals. Morning will require new footsteps. The old ones are already fading. Someone nearby shifts onto one elbow. For a few seconds you think they have awakened. Instead, they simply reach toward a sleeping child, smooth a loose curl away from a forehead, pull the quilt slightly higher, and settle back down again. The entire movement happens without opening fully alert eyes. Love, it seems, can remain awake even when the body sleeps. You smile into the darkness. No one notices. There is no need for them to. The wagon smells different now than it did after supper. The smoky scent has almost disappeared. Warm wool has become the strongest fragrance, followed by leather and the faint sweetness of dry straw. It is not the sort of perfume anyone would bottle. Even so, if someone could somehow capture this exact mixture, it might smell like perseverance. You notice how carefully everyone arranged tomorrow before falling asleep. Boots wait beside the bedding. Gloves rest inside hats. A lantern sits where it can be found immediately. Nothing has been left to chance. Morning always arrives more quickly than expected on the trail, preparing for it before sleep saves precious moments later. One old memoir recalls a grandmother who insisted on placing each mitten inside the opposite sleeve of every child's coat before bedtime. By sunrise, no one had to search through half-frozen bundles for missing clothing. The children thought it unnecessary until one especially bitter morning convinced them otherwise. Practical wisdom often arrives disguised as fussing. The wind changes direction. You know because the canvas begins moving differently. Instead of pressing against the side near your shoulder, it now stirs gently above your feet. The wagon responds with a different collection of quiet creaks. It is almost like hearing familiar music played in another key. Your breathing slows again. You're no longer waiting for the next unexpected sound. Instead, you begin listening simply because the night itself has become interesting. Far away, an owl calls once, just once. The sound drifts across the snowy prairie before fading completely. For a moment the wilderness feels enormous again. You'd almost forgotten how small the wagon circle really is. Beyond those few sheltered yards stretches a world of open grass hidden beneath winter, where countless unseen creatures continue their own lives without the slightest awareness of your little camp. That thought does not make you feel lonely. Oddly enough, it makes you feel connected. Everyone, whether wrapped beneath quilts or sheltered beneath feathers and fur, is simply trying to reach the morning. A faint glow appears behind your closed eyelids. You open them. It is not dawn. The clouds have shifted just enough to allow pale moonlight through for a few moments. The canvas roof becomes softly luminous. Frost crystals sparkle above like tiny stars caught inside the wagon. The light lasts less than a minute before clouds reclaim the sky. Still, it leaves behind a quiet sense of wonder. Even difficult nights make room for beautiful moments. No one speaks. No one points toward the glowing roof. Perhaps everyone else slept through it. Perhaps they each witnessed it in silence. Either possibility feels right. Your muscles have finally surrendered their last stubborn tension. The ache in your shoulders has faded into the background. Your legs feel pleasantly heavy beneath the buffalo robe. The pillow made from rolled clothing has settled into a shape that actually supports your neck. You never would have believed that yesterday. Comfort has not arrived because the wagon changed. It arrived because you did. You adapted. Slowly, patiently, almost without noticing. The scratching shrub outside has fallen still. The owl does not call again. The horses remain quiet. Only the slow breathing inside the wagon continues, rising and falling with gentle certainty. Your own breathing joins theirs until it becomes impossible to tell where one rhythm ends and another begins. At last. The thoughts of home drift gently away, replaced by dreams as soft as the snow gathering beyond the canvas, while the little wagon rests safely within its circle, carrying every sleeping soul one peaceful breath closer to the coming dawn. Dreams loosen their hold on you little by little. You do not wake suddenly. Instead, you drift upward through layers of half-sleep, never quite certain whether you're listening to the sounds around you or imagining them. Your body feels wonderfully heavy beneath the blankets. Only your mind has begun quietly exploring the edge of morning. Your throat feels dry, not painfully, just enough that you become aware of every slow breath passing in and out. The air inside the wagon has grown cooler again. The warmth everyone created during the night still lingers beneath the quilts, but above them the cold patiently waits. It has spent the last several hours pressing against the canvas without complaint or hurry. You carefully lift one hand from beneath the buffalo robe. Cool air greets your fingers. You smile to yourself. The cold remains as dependable as ever. You tuck your hand back beneath the blanket. There is no reason to encourage it. Somewhere nearby comes a quiet cough, then another, not harsh, not alarming, simply the sort of cough that follows breathing dry winter air for hours. A second traveller clears a throat before settling again into silence. The sounds are ordinary, almost expected. Weeks of travel have filled everyone's lungs with dust, campfire smoke, cold wind, and countless miles of open country. A single night rarely erased the effects of such a journey. Many families carried small cloth bags filled with dried herbs gathered before leaving home. Mint, horehound, chamomile, and other familiar plants often found their way into wagons, valued not because they could cure every illness, but because they offered comfort when someone developed a sore throat or an uneasy stomach. The remedies varied from family to family, shaped by local traditions carried west along with quilts and cooking pots. One woman near the front of the wagon slowly reaches toward a small bundle tucked beside the cedar chest. She unwraps it carefully. Even in the darkness you catch a faint scent. Peppermint, fresh, clean. It briefly overpowers the smell of wool and leather before fading again. She rubs a few leaves gently between her fingers, inhales their fragrance, then wraps them once more. Perhaps the familiar scent reminds her of home. Perhaps it simply helps clear the nose for a little while. Either reason seems perfectly worthwhile. You notice that nobody rushes. Every movement happens slowly, almost thoughtfully. Fast motions waste warmth. They disturb sleeping children. They invite cold air beneath carefully arranged blankets. Life inside the wagon has settled into an unspoken rhythm where patience quietly accomplishes more than haste. Across from you, an elderly man adjusts the scarf around his neck without opening his eyes completely. His hands know exactly where everything belongs. Habit has taken over. The scarf slips into place. The blanket follows. Within moments, his breathing grows deep once again. It occurs to you that much of frontier life depends upon habits, repeated so often they no longer require conscious thought. Fold the blanket, check the boots, protect the flour, keep the tinder dry, look after the animals. Repeat tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. Outside, something brushes lightly against the wagon, not the frozen shrub from earlier. This sound is softer. You listen. A gentle snuffling. One of the oxen has wandered close enough that its broad nose briefly touches the canvas before moving away again. The contact lasts only a second. Still. It brings an unexpected sense of reassurance. The animals remain calm. That matters. A traveller once wrote that he trusted the behaviour of his oxen more than the weather itself. If they rested quietly through the night, he allowed himself to rest as well. If they became restless without obvious cause, everyone paid attention. It was not superstition, it was experience. Animals often notice subtle changes before people did. You shift slightly beneath the bedding. The straw beneath you rustles with a dry whisper. It has flattened considerably since bedtime, yet somehow remains comfortable enough. You suspect almost anything would feel comfortable after so many miles of walking. Perspective changes quickly on the trail. Luxury becomes a folded coat beneath your head. Success becomes waking with dry blankets. Good fortune becomes discovering that your boots are exactly where you left them. The little victories grow wonderfully practical. You become aware of your own heartbeat. Slow, even, steady. Perhaps because everything else has grown so quiet. Even the wind seems content to rest for a while. A narrow ribbon of pale light suddenly appears along one edge of the rear flap. Not sunrise. Simply moonlight escaping through a tiny opening where the canvas has shifted. The thin line of silver stretches across the wagon floor before disappearing as the fabric settles again. For one brief moment it illuminated every tiny thread of the nearest quilt. Then it was gone. The memory remains. Some experiences last only seconds but stay with you for years. Old letters preserved by descendants occasionally mention how carefully families guarded their medicines. A small bottle of castor oil, a packet of quinine, a bit of camphor, or a treasured tin of homemade salve occupied surprisingly important places among the supplies. They were never abundant, and every drop carried value because replacing them on the open prairie was rarely possible. You glance toward a small wooden box secured beneath the front seat. Its contents remain unseen. Even so, everyone knows it is there, ready if needed, hopefully unnecessary. Silence settles again. You listen to the gentle rise and fall of sleeping companions. One child breathes with the slow certainty that only deep sleep can produce. Another occasionally sighs before growing quiet once more. Someone softly murmurs a name you cannot quite understand. Dreams continue their private conversations. You find yourself wondering whether tomorrow's sun will shine brightly across fresh snow or remain hidden behind heavy clouds. Either way. Morning will ask the same questions. Are the animals ready? Did the fire survive? Can the journey continue? Those answers belong to another time. Not yet. For now the wagon remains a tiny world suspended between yesterday and tomorrow. Your eyelids grow heavier once more. You no longer feel the urge to count passing minutes. The night has become something to experience rather than endure. The peppermint scent has faded almost completely. Only wool, cedar, and clean winter air remain. You pull one corner of the quilt a little higher beneath your chin. The familiar weight settles comfortably across your shoulders. Outside, the oxen stand quietly beneath fresh snow. Inside, every traveller borrows warmth from blankets, timber, and one another. Nothing extraordinary happens. No dramatic rescue, no sudden danger. Only the quiet determination of ordinary people carrying each other through another winter night. One careful breath after another. While the prairie waits patiently for the first true light of dawn to touch its endless white horizon. Sleep finally finds you, not the deep, uninterrupted sleep you enjoy in a warm bed with thick walls and a roof that never flutters in the wind. This is lighter, more cautious. Your body rests while one small part of your mind continues standing watch, quietly listening to the world beyond closed eyes. Dreams come and go without clear beginnings. For a little while you're back at home. The prairie disappears. Snow gives way to green fields. You hear chickens scratching in a yard somewhere beyond an open window. Someone laughs from another room. A kettle begins singing over a fire. The details feel wonderfully ordinary. Then, almost without warning, the sound of the kettle becomes the whistle of the wind against the wagon. The warm kitchen fades. The prairie returns. You do not wake completely. You simply drift into another dream. This time you are walking. The grass is so tall it brushes your hands. There is no snow anywhere. The sky stretches forever above your head, bright enough to make you squint. A meadowlark sings from a fence post that somehow exists in the middle of open country. Then the bird flies upward. Its wings become swirling snowflakes. Again the dream changes. Your sleeping mind seems determined to weave together memories and the journey itself until neither can be separated. Someone shifts beside you. The slight movement pulls you closer to waking. Your eyes remain closed. The warmth beneath the blankets has become pleasantly steady. The first sharp chill that greeted you after climbing into the wagon has softened over the long hours of the night. It has not disappeared. It simply no longer commands your attention. You notice the slow rhythm of breathing around you. One person breathes deeply, another with shorter, quieter breaths. A child lets out a tiny sleepy sigh. Together the sounds blend into something almost musical. No composer could have planned it. No audience would ever gather to hear it. Yet it feels complete. A woman who kept a journal during her family's westward journey once admitted that she could no longer remember the exact faces of some campsites, but she never forgot the sound of everyone sleeping together inside the wagon. Years later, she wrote that the breathing of her family remained one of the strongest memories of the trail. It is easy to understand why. Certain sounds settle deep inside memory. You become aware of your own stomach, not hungry exactly, just empty enough to remind you that supper happened many hours ago. Tomorrow's breakfast is already waiting somewhere inside the flour sack and the coffee tin. For now, it exists only as a pleasant thought. The wagon gives a gentle sigh. A board settles somewhere beneath the bedding. You've grown so accustomed to those quiet noises that they barely interrupt your drifting thoughts. Earlier they seemed unfamiliar. Now they feel almost protective. Old wood announcing that it still holds together. You drift again. This dream is stranger. You're trying to count stars. Each time you reach 10, another 100 appear. Soon the stars become snowflakes, then feathers, then tiny scraps of white cloth floating across the sky. Nothing makes much sense. Dreams rarely apologize for that. Somewhere in the distance you hear your name, or perhaps you only imagine it. The voice sounds familiar. It could belong to someone from home. It could belong to a fellow traveller. It fades before you can decide. The darkness behind your eyelids grows lighter for just a moment. Not because dawn has arrived. The clouds have shifted again, allowing moonlight to pass through the canvas, even with your eyes closed. The change reaches you, a gentle brightness, then darkness once more. It feels like the night itself breathing. You move one foot slightly. The boot has warmed enough that the leather no longer feels stiff against your ankle. You're grateful you left it on. A freezing morning is difficult enough without wrestling reluctant boots that have spent hours hardening in the cold. Lists of emigrant supplies preserved in museums reveal how carefully families balanced every pound loaded into a wagon. Extra comforts often disappeared first whenever weight became a concern. Yet bedding almost always remained. People willingly left behind furniture, decorative items, and heavy household goods before sacrificing the blankets that stood between them and nights exactly like this one. Weight had value. Warmth had greater value. A faint smell reaches you. Not peppermint this time, smoke, very distant. Perhaps someone outside has quietly stirred the embers, hoping to preserve enough fire for the coming morning. The scent barely lingers before the cold air carries it away. Still, it is enough to remind you that another day is waiting beyond the darkness. Your dreams become quieter instead of clear pictures. They turn into feelings, warm sunlight, the creak of a porch swing, the rough bark of an old tree beneath your hand, the cool splash of water from a familiar creek. Memory chooses curious details, not grand occasions, not dramatic adventures, simple moments that once seemed too ordinary to remember. The prairie has given those moments new importance. One elderly pioneer later confessed that he spent an entire winter crossing dreaming about fresh apples. Not pies, not cakes, just apples. He claimed the memory of their crisp sweetness became almost impossible to shake. When he finally reached an orchard many months later, he ate so many that he regretted it before sunset. Some dreams are wonderfully practical. You smile in your sleep, or perhaps only almost. A child nearby turns over. The blanket slips before it can fall completely. Another hand gently catches the edge and pulls it back. The movement happens so naturally that it hardly disturbs anyone, even asleep. Families continue caring for one another. The wind brushes softly against the wagon. It no longer sounds impatient. Instead, it has settled into a low, steady whisper that rises and falls without urgency. The storm seems farther away now, not gone, simply moving on with its own long journey across the plains. Your body sinks deeper into the bedding. The straw has shaped itself beneath your weight over the course of the night. The rolled coat beneath your head has become surprisingly comfortable. You wonder, just before drifting away once more, whether comfort is really something a place provides, or something people slowly create for themselves. The question slips away before an answer arrives. Outside, snow continues covering the prairie in fresh white silence. Inside, dreams wander gently from home to trail and back again, carrying familiar faces, forgotten songs, warm kitchens, summer fields, and quiet hopes through the sleeping wagon until they blend into one peaceful story that lasts only until morning begins knocking softly at the edge of the frozen world. At first you think it is another dream. A pale brightness rests against your closed eyelids. It is so gentle that you almost ignore it. The darkness has not disappeared. It has simply become thinner. You open one eye. The canvas above you is no longer black. It carries the faint grey colour that belongs only to the moments before sunrise, when the world has not quite decided to wake. No one moves. The wagon remains filled with sleeping forms bundled beneath quilts and robes. For a few peaceful moments you simply watch the slow rise and fall of blankets. It is impossible to tell where one person's warmth ends and another's begins. The night has quietly stitched everyone together. You listen. The silence has changed again. During the storm the wind spoke constantly. Now it rests somewhere far beyond the camp. Only the smallest sounds remain. A leather strap taps softly against the outside of the wagon. Snow slides from the canvas roof with a muted sigh. An animal shakes itself, sending a faint jingle through its harness. The prairie has not become quiet. It has become delicate. You ease yourself onto one elbow. The rolled coat beneath your head has lost its shape during the night, but you hardly notice. Every muscle feels pleasantly stiff, not painful, simply reluctant to begin another day. You stretch 1 foot a fraction beneath the blankets, Your toes find warmth. Your heel discovers cold. The difference makes you smile. Even inside the wagon, winter has drawn invisible borders. Someone nearby yawns. It is long and completely unhurried. Another traveller answers with a sleepy sigh. Nobody speaks. There seems to be an unspoken agreement that words can wait another minute. Morning has a way of arriving quietly on the prairie. There is no city bell, no neighbour calling across a fence, no wagon rumbling down a familiar street. Light simply gathers, little by little, until everyone notices it without remembering the exact moment it appeared. You glance toward the rear flap. A narrow seam of silver outlines its edge. Fresh snow reflects every trace of dawn, making the outside appear brighter than the sky itself. The child nearest you opens sleepy eyes. For several seconds there is only blinking, then a tiny smile, no questions, no complaints. Just the quiet satisfaction of discovering that the family is still together exactly where it should be. The child pulls the blanket higher for another few moments, clearly hoping that morning might politely wait. It does not. Across the wagon, someone carefully sits upright. The movement is slow enough that the wooden frame barely complains. Hands disappear beneath a blanket. A moment later they emerge holding a pair of gloves that spent the night warming inside the bedding instead of freezing near the floor. A thoughtful decision made before bedtime has become a pleasant reward now. Nearby, another traveller reaches for boots. The leather bends more willingly than expected. You suspect they were tucked close enough to the bedding to borrow a little warmth through the night. Little preparations often repay themselves before breakfast. You brush one hand across the quilt. Tiny beads of moisture have gathered where warm breath met colder fabric. The cloth feels cool but not soaked. It will need airing later, if left folded all day. Dampness would quietly settle into the fibres. Nothing dramatic, just another small chore waiting beside countless others. The list of morning tasks is already beginning to form without anyone saying it aloud. Boots, fire, animals, breakfast, harnesses, then the road. The journey never truly pauses. It simply sleeps. You hear someone inhale deeply. The scent inside the wagon has changed once again. The smoky traces from last evening have almost disappeared. Cold linen, wool, leather. A faint trace of cedar from the storage chest. The clean smell of snow drifting through tiny gaps in the canvas. Morning has its own fragrance. You begin fastening your coat. The buttons seem slower than they did at home. Your fingers are still waking, across from you. Someone quietly laughs. The sound is hardly louder than a whisper. A mitten has vanished. For several amused seconds, the search begins beneath blankets, behind bedrolls, beside a flour sack, and under a folded buffalo robe. At last the missing mitten is discovered beneath its owner's shoulder. Apparently it spent the night in the warmest seat available. The tiny mystery ends with another sleepy smile. No one makes fun of the mistake. Everyone has misplaced something inside the crowded wagon at least once. The rear flap opens a hand's width. A ribbon of pale morning enters. It carries air so crisp that every person immediately notices it. Cold brushes across your face, not harshly, more like a careful reminder that the prairie has been waiting outside all along. The flap closes again. Just a quick look. Nothing more. Someone murmurs that the sky is clearing. Those few words spread quiet relief through the wagon. Not excitement. Relief. Clear skies mean easier travel, dry blankets, a better chance to warm hands beside the morning fire. Hope often arrives disguised as ordinary weather. You picture the campsite outside without even seeing it. The wagons standing in their familiar circle. snow resting along the spokes of every wheel, oxen wearing thin white blankets across broad backs, horses breathing little clouds into the cold air, the fire waiting beneath a layer of pale ash for someone to coax it awake. Soon every corner of the camp will begin moving, a bucket carried toward melted snow, a pot hung above fresh flames, harness leather checked with practiced hands, children stamping sleepy feet inside stiff boots, steam rising from the first cups of hot coffee. The quiet world will gradually fill with ordinary sounds, nothing hurried, nothing wasted. You realize something. Last evening you feared this wagon might feel too small. Now it feels almost cozy. Its narrow walls have sheltered laughter, worry, sleep, dreams, whispered conversations, and shared warmth. The space itself has not changed. Your understanding of it has. Outside. The eastern sky slowly gathers colour behind distant clouds. Not brilliant gold, not fiery orange, just the faintest promise that daylight is on its way. The promise is enough. You pull the blanket from your shoulders for the first time. Cold immediately settles around you. It slips beneath your sleeves and touches your neck. You shiver once. Only once. Then you stand carefully, mindful of every sleeping companion still finishing the last peaceful moments of the night. The wagon greets your weight with a familiar creak. Instead of sounding worn, it almost sounds welcoming. One more day, one more stretch of prairie, one more sunrise shared by the little wooden shelter that carried its travellers safely through the long blizzard. Protecting their rest until the first quiet light of morning finally found them. You rest one hand against the wagon frame before stepping outside. The wood feels cold enough to remind you where you are. For one last moment you remain beneath the canvas, balanced between the warmth of the night and the brightness of a new day. Then you lift the flap. Morning greets you without ceremony. The storm has moved on. Snow stretches in every direction, smooth and untouched except for the small circle of wagons gathered together like quiet islands in a white sea. The prairie seems larger than it did yesterday. Fresh snow has erased familiar tracks, softened uneven ground, and hidden the little signs of yesterday's labour. It looks as though no one has ever crossed it. Only the wagons prove otherwise. Thin ribbons of smoke begin rising from two campfires where early risers patiently coax sleeping embers back to life. The smoke climbs almost straight upward. Hardly any wind remains after a night of constant listening. The stillness feels almost surprising. You draw a slow breath. The air is so cold that it tingles inside your nose before settling into your lungs. Yet beneath the sharp chill there is something wonderfully clean. The scent of fresh snow, the faint aroma of wood smoke, a trace of coffee beginning to warm somewhere nearby, is enough to make the morning feel welcoming. People emerge one by one, no grand announcements, no loud conversations, just familiar faces blinking at the light, stretching stiff shoulders, and smiling with quiet relief after discovering that everyone has come safely through the night. Someone kneels beside a fire and gently feeds it slender pieces of dry wood. Another shakes snow from a folded blanket before hanging it across a wagon tongue to air. Children leave careful footprints around the camp, their curiosity returning faster than the warmth in their fingers. One of the oxen lifts its broad head and watches the activity with calm, patient eyes. Its breath drifts upward in slow white clouds. Soon the animals receive their share of attention. Harnesses are examined, snow is brushed away, feed is measured with practiced hands. Nobody hurries. The day is long enough without beginning it in haste. You notice the wagon more carefully than ever before. Yesterday it looked like a collection of boards, wheels, canvas, and iron. Today it feels almost like an old travelling companion. The canvas carries a few new creases from the storm. The wheels wear a delicate ring of frozen snow. A rope has been tightened. A leather strap has been adjusted, tiny changes, almost invisible. Yet together they tell the story of another night completed. Nearby, someone pours steaming coffee into battered tin cups. Another stirs a pot of simple porridge. Breakfast is modest. No feast appears after the blizzard. Still, the warmth rising from the food feels like a celebration all its own. People gather close enough to share conversation without raising their voices. Someone remarks that the stars must have returned before dawn because the sky cleared so completely. Another points toward a line of distant trees barely visible beyond the snowy plain. The road will continue in that direction. It always continues. There is comfort in that certainty. The trail asks for patience rather than speed. One careful mile, then another, and another after that. You finish the last warm sip from your cup and hold it for a moment longer, enjoying the lingering heat against your hands. Soon enough those hands will return to cold reins, frozen buckles, and stiff canvas ties. There is no need to rush toward that moment. Around you the camp slowly comes alive. Blankets are folded, bedrolls are tied, boxes return to their familiar places inside each wagon. Every object seems to know exactly where it belongs. Nothing is wasted. Nothing travels without purpose. The quiet order has become almost graceful. You climb back into the wagon one final time. The space feels smaller now that daylight fills it, yet it also feels friendlier. You recognize every corner, every chest, every hook, every carefully packed bundle. Only hours ago this little shelter held darkness, whispered voices, shared warmth, drifting dreams, and the steady breathing of sleeping travellers. Now it prepares to become a moving home once again. You pause before taking your seat. For just a heartbeat you imagine the countless mornings that followed this one. Miles still to travel, rivers to cross, prairies to leave behind, mountains waiting beyond the horizon, new homes not yet built. Children who would one day describe this journey to their own grandchildren. The night inside the wagon would become only one memory among many. Even so, it would remain a precious one, not because it was easy, because everyone faced it together. The wheels begin turning. Snow compresses beneath their weight with a gentle crunch. The wagon rocks in the familiar rhythm that has slowly become part of your own heartbeat. Ahead lies another stretch of open country. Behind rests a campsite that will soon disappear beneath drifting snow until almost no trace remains. The prairie keeps very few footprints. It remembers people in quieter ways. Now, as the journey gently continues beyond the horizon, allow yourself to remain here for just a little longer. Picture the wagon moving steadily through the clear winter morning. Hear the soft creak of seasoned wood. Listen to the slow footsteps of the faithful oxen. Watch the sunlight spread across the snow until every crystal glows with a gentle silver light. Feel the quilt still holding a little of the warmth gathered through the night. Notice how calm everything has become. There is no need to hurry, no task waiting for you, no cold wind pressing at the canvas. Only the peaceful rhythm of the trail carrying you onward. If you wish, let the wagon continue without effort. Let each quiet turn of the wheels carry away another busy thought. Let the endless prairie become wide enough to hold every worry until it grows too small to see. The sky is bright now. The storm has passed. The morning is kind. The road stretches ahead with patient certainty. You have travelled through the long winter night, shared warmth with fellow travellers, listened to the whisper of snow against canvas, and welcomed a new dawn across the open plains. There is nothing more you need to do. Simply rest. Breathe slowly. Imagine the gentle rocking of the wagon becoming softer and softer until it feels almost like the motion of a cradle. The voices fade into the distance. The creak of the wheels becomes quieter. The prairie grows peaceful beneath the wide winter sky. And somewhere ahead, beyond the next rise, another quiet evening waits with another fire, another circle of wagons, and another chance to sleep beneath the sheltering canvas, knowing that even the longest journey is made one calm day and one restful night at a time. Sweet dreams.